Bonjour à tous, nous allons commencer.
Good morning, everyone.
Si vous voulez bien vous asseoir.
Welcome, everyone. Could you please take your seats?
Hi everybody. Let's start. Alors hier, nous avons beaucoup parlé
So yesterday,
de l'instruction en
we
famille
talked
et
a lot
des
about
difficultés, des problématiques
home
que cela
education
soulève.
and
Comment
the
aussi,
challenges
dans
of
les
home
ateliers,
education.
comment on peut aider
During the
nos
workshops, we
communautés, nos
also
différentes
how we could help our
nationales ou
communities,
plus locales,
be they national or local
de
communities.
grandir.
How can we help our communities grow? How can we encourage families to answer the questions they may have? We had a lot of interactions. I don't know if it was the same for you, but I really enjoyed meeting new people from different cultures, different countries. I interacted with people from all around, and I tried to share my experience and really I really listened to all your testimonies, and last night when I went to bed, I told myself, oh, that was such a great day. I never interacted that much with so many people doing home education, especially on a topic that is so dear to my heart and a topic that is essential in France, but also in Europe and throughout the world for the well-being of children. This morning, I would like to now give the floor to several speakers. We are welcoming Gerald Hübner. He lives in Manitoba, Canada. He's a charter member of the GHEX board. Gerald and his wife, Bev, home educated their two children. They are now both adults, and I'm sure they are living a satisfying life. And so they home educated them through all 14 great education years to graduation, so that is great. Now they have 4 homeschool grandchildren.
L'homeschooling, l'instruction en famille de père en fils.
Home education is passed on from the father to the son and the grandfather to the son and father to grandson. Gerald and Bev have spent 30 years in leadership of home education organizations, and Gerald serves as the board chair of HSLDA Canada and the Canadian Centre for Home Education. He also worked for over 30 years in senior management of the agriculture department with the provincial government in the province of Manitoba. Gerald and Bev have shared their journey and experience with parents, government officials, and other leaders in over 12 countries around the world. So thank you for being with us, and please give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Jean-Baptiste. It is a thrill for Bev and I to be here together with you and to be able to spend time sharing a little bit of the journey and the joy of home education. This session is talking about where do we go from here, and a significant part of that question is really, I think, reflected by the thing that I find every so often I get somewhat frustrated. I'm frustrated this morning because when I look at the clock, I stand up at the front of the room often, and we know that we have an appointment with some food at 12, and we have a job to do to get through to that. But our real job is to be able to share together and to do that in a fulsome way, and I'm looking forward to doing those things. It's interesting the cultures that we live in, where we have different expectations of time, and that's what makes our cross-cultural experiences interesting and exciting. But one of the things that we need to realize and remember is as we teach our children, one of the things that we're teaching them is that there are essential skills in life that go beyond the textbook, that go beyond the curriculum. One of the things that I found over and over is how do you relate to people? And how do you do that in a way that is respectful, in a way that is encouraging, and yet sometimes can be challenging as well. To say it's time to start, but to do that in a way that we don't offend. And it's similar to experiences where I've had in having many people work for me, where you have employees that almost want to be rewarded because they came to work. Not just that they did a good job, but that they actually came to work, and they're excited that they came to work on time. You know, it's a mental shift of, you know, they it's not that they were late, they actually came on time. And we need to, I think, raise children that know how to work, that know the responsibilities that they have. And sometimes the curriculums don't include that, but the reality is that in home education, we can make sure that we are teaching things that go beyond. And it's things that are not part of many other curriculums. So where do we go from here? I've often wondered how I get to a place where I need to be. I don't know about you, but I have to confess, I'm a man. And as a man, I don't like to admit when I'm lost. I don't like to admit that I need help to find the place where I need to go. To actually pull over at the side of the road and say, excuse me, can you help me? Because I don't know where I need to go. And usually it's, the start of the problem is usually that I don't actually know where I am. You know, I know that I want to go to Paris, but I don't necessarily know where I am in order for somebody to give me help to help me get to be where I need to be. So in order to address the question, where do we go from here? I would like to ask the question, so where are we? You've been in the various places where they have the graphic up and there's the big arrow or the dot that says you are here. And I always find it takes me some time to orient myself, even though I can see the dot. It's like, what does that mean? Like, how does that relate to the world around me and the things that were happening? So I'd like to start by saying, not where are we going, but where are we? And then talk a little bit about where we're going. We are, I think, at an exciting gateway to realizing significant partnerships. We're at a gate, we're at a door, we're at the start of an elevator, and we're not quite sure whether it's going up or down yet, but we know we are here. So where is that? It's at a gateway, a place where significant partnerships are in front of us that can support the development of national homeschool organizations across Europe. Sylvia shared that this event was the fulfillment of a vision. The vision of building European homeschool network and a team that works together. We're here. We're at the launch of this powerful cross-European partnership that will develop applied regional connections, ways that you can practically talk to each other, ways that you can do things together, get ideas, and all of those things that are included. It's the start of an exciting journey. But again, we just have a dot. We're here. Where are we going? We're in an unprecedented time. Home education, we've talked about it, has gone through some exciting and unprecedented changes. Home education has existed, and we talked about that. Mike talked about it, that has existed for centuries. But it had been relegated to be a relatively fringe element of education. It was a relatively small group of people that I think authorities could feel like they could kind of almost ignore it because it was small enough that it didn't matter. That's not the case anymore. We're at a place where it is now, because of COVID, because of people having experienced this thing called home education. Whether it really was home education or not is sometimes debatable, but their children were at home. Their children were with them. The children were not in school. So in terms of some of the elements, they were homeschooling as in their mind. And when it comes to perception, as they say, is reality. And we have seen a shift in perception. People's awareness of this thing called home education has shifted in ways that we never imagined. Millions and millions and millions of children all over the world were at home. And people, when they now hear this thing called home education, they said, well, we did that. And that shift in perception, I don't think that we realize yet what that will do in terms of the impact on public policy, the impact on public perception of us and those around us, and how it will affect all of those things. To have virtually every child in the world out of school caused unprecedented awareness and interest. We're here. Home education has doubled, at least in many places, and we're not looking back. Yet some authorities now are saying, with this growth comes risks. All of these children, we need to do something about home education. And I've heard that refrain in many places around the world. The question is, what is something? It varies as different places around the world, and I think we will see, as these doors of the elevator in front of us open, we will see that there are things that we'll be dealing with that we probably have never dealt with before. The times are changing. But we're here. We're making progress. Mike Donnelly talked about the realities of where we're at in the battle and how that battle is changing. We know that the battle is real, and in particular, countries like France here, in Germany and Sweden and many other places around the world, the battle is real. The battle is impacting parents' ability to freely choose to do this thing. In many places, we figure something out. We find a way. We're innovative. We're sneaky. We as homeschoolers, if there's a way, we will find it. But it's not easy. And it's becoming somewhat more challenging in many places. So we have come together around the world. We've had 4 global conferences that have advanced. Now, the conference doesn't advance anything. It's the people that attend the conference that advance things. You and others have advanced home education freedom around the world. At each conference, we've chosen a theme that was really a declaration, a statement, a communication. When people say, so why did you go to this thing? We were able to say, we went to this thing for this reason. So the first one in Berlin, we presented home education. We said, hey, world, here's this thing called home education. It works. And the conference was built around making that point. The next one in Rio de Janeiro was making a statement again. Not only does home education work, but it's a right. We claim that right. We seize that right. We encourage the practice of that right, to use it, because if you don't use it, you lose it. Home education a right. In Russia, we went further. We declared that you can homeschool. Not only is it a right, not only is it something that works, but you can do it to the people around the world. And then online in 2020, we declared that home education was a global movement. We looked at ourselves and we said, like, are we a movement? We said, secondly, that we were a global solution, but we had no idea to what. Well, we did have lots of ideas, but we didn't realize the impact of what was going to happen or what was happening. We were just at the start of the pandemic at that point. And we didn't realize how much of a solution home education would provide to people around the world. So we declared all of these things, the clear human right. And you've heard about this from a number of speakers here today, and it's foundational. We declared that it works, and it works well. And our research track of the GHEX does a great job of promoting and highlighting that. So these conferences have happened. They're needed, and we want to continue them, and we're working on the 5th one, and we'll announce that shortly. So where are we? We're making progress, but also we're being noticed. We're a movement that actually is mentioned in reports, in a number of reports in international education and family rights policy. People are talking about this thing, the Global Home Education Exchange, as a force, as a movement, as an impactor of these things. Even though we may not realize it, we are being noticed. So as we've moved forward, we've provided a number of things, and some of you have picked up a copy of the Rio Principles. And if you haven't, I'd encourage you to do that, to use that as a way to have discussions with policymakers and others. So where are we? We're at a crossroads. We have battles looming and challenges ahead. So what are the challenges? We struggle with having the practical needed energy and support as leaders. We get tired. It's not easy. We feel alone. All of these things are in front of us. So where do we go from here? I don't have a roadmap, but I think I can point out a few steps or waypoints that can help in determining where to go from here. We've got the dot. Where do we want to be? Well, first, we need to recognize and realize the urgency and the gravity of the threats that are looming in the short term. It's serious, it's compelling, and it's worthy of our efforts. We are needed. You are needed. The threats are sometimes legal, and we have developed effective legal strategies that deal with these threats in many cases, and we need to continue to do that. We find that in addition to the legal threats, we're battling ideological challenges. People that don't just say it's illegal, but they say we don't like what you're doing. We don't like what you're teaching. We don't agree with the things that you are teaching, indoctrinating your children with, in their words. So it's a different battle. It's not a legal fight, it's an ideological fight. It's an ideological challenge to say we as parents have the legal right and the moral right and the human right to be able to teach our children what we believe to be right. And whether it be for faith reasons or values reasons, those are significant. These threats are serious, and I believe that they'll increase more and more. Secondly, we need to develop a long-term view of these battles and have long-term goals. This is needed because we're not in a sprint, we're in a marathon. This is a long-term battle. And I guess in other words, I would say that it's really not about you and your family. It's not about you and your family. It's about your grandchildren's grandchildren. And we need to look at a generational legacy view. And I'll ask for, if you can put up a picture that will help me illustrate this. A legacy view is needed. It's not about my family, my children. We made it through. And that's great. But what about my grandchildren? And they'll make it through. And I'm not worried. But what about their children and their children and their children? And it's as we work on that view, that legacy view is needed. And that's not an easy thing to do, but I do think that if we view it that way, it gives us the energy to run this race as we should, not as a sprint, but as a marathon, to be able to look into the future and know that we're not doing this for today or tomorrow. We're doing this for down the road, farther than we will exist, to be able to give our future generations the things that they need. So how can we do these things? Well, we probably can't do it, at least not alone, and at least not quickly. We need to, as I've just said, prepare our children and our grandchildren. We need to give them the tools that they need to carry on this battle, because they will carry it on and they will do things that we have never been able to do in ways that we've never been able to do them, because they will be equipped in ways that I'm not equipped with. And I find that exciting because we will be able to take it to the next level, to prepare them in special ways. So homeschooling is not about you. It's not about your family. It's about the legacy that goes after us. We need to teach children, and even more so to teach and cheer on the parents, to teach and prepare them for the future battles and for preparing their children for that. We need to be able to prepare them to take on those challenges, and we certainly need to stay involved. And Bev and I have been out of homeschooling longer than we were involved in homeschooling. We're done with our homeschooling in our home. Yes, our grandchildren come and we do things with them, but we're not the parents. And we now are cheerleaders and encouragers, and I think that there's a role for that. One of the challenges that I see is so often people finish homeschooling and then they leave. They walk away and we never see them again because they're done. How do we have them see the vision as parents of a bigger picture? That it's not about them and not about their family, but it's about a movement. It's about a future that they have an interest in, but they actually have never thought of. And it's a matter of sharing that with them. The end goal is the freedom of parents to freely choose and direct the education of their children as a foundational legacy to advance this freedom for everybody, everywhere. So where do we go from here? Well, we need to keep on keeping on. It's as simple as that. We just need to keep going. Sometimes we don't know where we're going. Sometimes we don't know where we are, but we just need to keep on keeping on. And as we meet together, we remind ourselves this is where we are, and this is where we're going. And as we look to our family, we get the vision, the inspiration, the foundational reasons of why we're doing this. Again, it's not about me and my family. It's about my grandchildren's grandchildren and the generations that come after that. So what do? We keep on keeping on. We work and we pull together like never before. And remember that we need to enjoy this adventure that we're in together. Because it's as we work together, as we enjoy this adventure together, that we can work together not as a job, but as something that goes far beyond us and has really legacy benefits, legacy developments that will make a difference into the future. And I would just encourage us as we sit here, as we are here, that we remind ourselves and remember where we're going. And to be able to share that, to be able to talk to our children about the things that we have experienced so that they will be prepared to take on the challenges that we were never prepared for. And I think that we will get there. And I just thank you for the opportunity to be part of this adventure, this journey together with you. And we're with you and look forward to working together. So thank you. We're going to have a time for questions a bit later, but it's my privilege now to introduce a good friend. Jan de Groef, Dr. Jan de Groef, is one of, you can read his biography and it's impressive. But I want to tell you a few things about him that I think make him special to us as homeschool leaders from around Europe and across the globe. Jan is one of the guys that governments, departments of education, institutions, universities that are teaching not just teachers but professors of education the principles of what this thing of freedom of education is all about, what parental rights are all about, what all of these things mean. Jan has been one of the people that is called in by governments around the world to say, so we want to change our educational system, Jan. How could we do that? What would that look like? He's called into committees at groups that we don't always think are our friends. Some of the committees in the United Nations and UNESCO and these educational groups that are writing documents about education and about parenting. Jan is one of the people that speaks wisdom into those processes. And why is he special? Why is he here? Because he's a friend. It doesn't mean that he always agrees with us, because friends don't need to always agree. To have good, fulsome debate is important so that we can understand various viewpoints. And Jan, I want to welcome you here today to come and speak to us about where do we go from here. Because I know that your experience in a number of fronts equips you in a very special way to be able to address this topic, and I'm looking forward to your sharing. So Jan de Groef, welcome here.
He definitely is too kind, isn't he? Good guy. But still, questions to be raised. My name indeed is Jan de Groef. I dedicated most of my life on freedom. Freedom in education. Freedom of education. But let me first confess something. I'm loyal to Catholic schools. My 6 kids went to Catholic schools, and my 15 grandkids are going to or are supposed to go to Catholic schools. Some still are little babies. But yeah, we have some tradition in our family, loyalty to Catholic schools, non-state schools. But Christine, my wife, who is a judge, magistrate, she reminded me yesterday, she was born in Congo, DRC. And she was homeschooled for 8 years. And she came back in Belgium when she was 8 years old, and she mentioned, what a loss of time being at the school. I was being educated by my mother and by my father during 4 years, 5 years. And what a progress made vis-à-vis the curriculum of schools. Shocking, but she was completely right. So I was preparing to shorten my speech because I was told to come a little bit later, and I prepared a speech of 20, 25 minutes, but I will keep it very short, shorter than I'm supposed to speak. I did my homework to some extent also before coming, of course. And my homework was, what about research evidence? And yeah, in Belgium, 92% of parents are, between brackets, assessed in the progress made through homeschooling are approved extremely positively. 75% of homeschooled kids are going to high schools, to university, to higher education. But even before COVID, let me just COVID, remember the time where parents are supposed to replace teachers. Well, research evidence. We should make more use of statistics and of research on quality in education through homeschool. And lack of support from parents was the biggest obstacle which kept students from participating in virtual programs. But the PISA, quite important, even in 2009, students' scores were positively associated with parental involvement regardless of their socioeconomic background. Mothers, another research, big research. Mother's ability, remember, mothers, the queens, the real queens. Mother's ability at home and home input can explain together more than half of the gap in test scores between minorities and advanced students. Wow, that's shocking. Correlations between parental involvement and student achievement. The increasing children's motivation, engagement, and success through input of mothers and party fathers. And so there is a whole pile of documents we should definitely more use. So increasing parental involvement for disadvantaged students can yield even larger benefits than for advanced students. So it's just a myth that just a question of socioeconomic privilege, that it is the elite who is opting for homeschool. So there is research evidence, and one of my proposals yesterday afternoon was invest time and energy in research and use research, which is already existing. Parents, are they consumers? Are they the problems? Or are they partners? From my perspective, home education, home schooling is a very fascinating and intriguing legal policy issue. What is the real scoop? What are the parental rights? Who is judging what is in the best interest of the child? Should the parent excuse himself, motivate himself vis-à-vis the state? What about the child and his voice? Yesterday I referred to some interesting, new, recent constitutional court cases worldwide. South African court couple of months ago, debated at large on the constitutional right of the children to voice their opinion in procedures dealing with schools. Wow. There are some other quite interesting, also in Europe, interesting constitutional court. So we should make use of those. That was my second lesson yesterday. Make use of comparative law. Yes, indeed. I was quite active during 12, 15 years in Russia. After the collapse of the USSR, Edward Jeprov, the first Minister of Education and Research in the government, Yeltsin government, invited me. He said, Edward was professor of history of education at the Lomonosov University in Moscow. University, you should, the campus, you should visit once. Probably within decades, not within decades, but still quite interesting place in Moscow. He raised the question, well, Jan, we will never succeed in the transition from the USSR model to a democracy, society based on the rule of law, if we will not able to draft appropriate education legislation. From my comparative perspective, and it was the case, I worked also during 10 years in South Africa on their draft legislation, not just on education, but also in the wider spectrum. The transition of one regime to a democracy is always determined by education. No reconciliation in society without reconciliation in schools and through schools. That was the case in the Balkans, where I worked with Max van der Stoel, the first High Commissioner for National Minorities, on education, on language, on cultural rights. But all conflicts in society are centered in schools. But Edward Jeprov invited me to work on the first basic law on education. And yes, because of the Belgian model, we are Belgians, we are modest, aren't we? We should be more modest. But I referred yesterday at large to the first judgment of the European Court, the Belgian linguistic case. And I quote yesterday just three sentences. Education is the prior responsibility of the parent. The whole shift, the whole change of a school-driven, state-driven approach for decades and centuries. Nation building through schools. The state authority through education processes in schools. And also the power of the church. I'm a canon law graduate, but we have also to be very extremely modest. So authority of the state, authority of the church through schools. And there's a complete change after the Second World War, namely the prior responsibility of the parent, the right of the learner, of the child. That's the first principle. And not first the school of the state authority. So it is a dramatic change. And it should be respected. And I prepared some legal arguments, but I guess that will be for the next time, or during coffee break. And I love to quote quite often, when it is relevant, the first president of the European Court of Human Rights. Because I quote one sentence. The second sentence was, the state must regulate education. And there we can differ to some extent from idea what should be regulated and how should be regulated. But in my legal research, it's the minimum. And even there, we should be suspicious. But the third quote is, what means education? Education, by definition, is decided by the court, European Court, the highest court of 800 million residents throughout Europe, the 48 countries and not the 27. Namely, education is the transfer of values, of beliefs, and of culture. It's not just training. is not just teaching, it's about the heart. It's about your identity. It's about your soul and your future. And Lucius Wildhaber, the first chairperson of the European Court, he wrote, this is so important because you have to have parental choice. It's up to the responsibility of the parent and not of the state. And he wrote, a public school system tends towards a rigidity. A public school system tends towards a rigidity which seems disproportionate in a democratic society. Wow! The first president is mentioning that, yes, indeed, we have to be nervous and critical vis-à-vis state authority, especially in education. For that reason, we are opting for, also in international scene, for much more the learning outcomes than for the structures. And read SDG 4, Sustainable Development 4, namely the right to inclusive quality education for all in lifelong learning. It's not about just attending schools. No. It's about outcomes, development goals, learning outcomes, and not a structure to realize those goals. It's also from international perspective quite relevant that we will use those kind of arguments. I have to add that in the new era, the digital society, state authorities do not have the argument on monopolies. And yeah, may I, small parenthesis. We had a huge good conversation yesterday with Jean-Baptiste on the law of 24th of August 2021, Article 49, on the French case. To some extent, France is a quite interesting case. A little bit shocking, but interesting. By the way, when we published Charles Glenn, Professor Dr. Charles Glenn, the best comparatists on earth on education freedom, the 4 books, 4 volumes on balancing rights and duties, autonomy, freedom, and accountability. 2 volumes on SS and on comparative staff, and 2 other volumes on country reports. France was the biggest one, the most complex chapter on how to deal with education rights in France. And a second big chapter was homeschool, because of just the excellent example on conflicting rights and duties. So I read that Article 49, and what is shocking is this idea of a state who repeats that you have to ask a permission, an authority, an authorization before opting for homeschool. It's not up to the state to replace the rights of parents. So the Article 49, opting for public schools and private schools, and then you have to ask a permission by exception. But parental rights are no exceptional. They are the principle. They are just in principle. That's their fundamental rights, and not. So it is complete, and to some extent it is little bit referring to another debate on the signe distinctif on Descartes, where the basic reasoning of that law, interdiction of distinct symbols, is ce n'est pas une question, maintenant en français, ce n'est pas une question de la liberté.
It's not a question of the freedom of consciousness, but it's a question of public order.
What you are, if you are bearing a symbol, cross, for instance, it's not a question of conscience, but refusing those signs is a question of public order. So the whole sector, so the Jacobin, the centralizing state is really shocking vis-à-vis those who are opting for freedom. Freedom in education, freedom through education. So I definitely should go very quick to my conclusions. There are similarities and dissimilarities on home education throughout Europe. Again, Belgium, 1830, a model constitution for many other democracies in that time, perhaps till now. We refined the constitution in 1988. I was one of the co-authors. The first sentence remains intact. Education is free. First principle, including it's a choice of the parent to opt for homeschool. It's their responsibility, also their responsibility. And we have a week, you had a workshop yesterday on the Belgian case, quite interesting because it's, again, trying to reach consensus about balances between rights and duties. Yeah. There is a strong international law argument, and I want to articulate much more in the next session or next sessions. The international law argument. It's powerful. Take the Convention of the Rights of the Child. What is the most recent international document on education? Most are outdated, are from the 60s. But the Convention of the Rights of the Child is focusing on education and not on schooling in schools. It's about learning attainments and development goals, but not about structures. There is no one article in all the Convention of the Rights of the Child referring to schools. So I have here a list of other legal arguments, but the lawyers among you can have an again, in comparative law and international law should be more fostered for those who want to defend parental rights also through homeschool. And that will be my last sentence. Those who are opting for freedom in education and freedom through education should be concerned about the legislation dealing with home education, homeschool. Because it is a touchstone of democracy. It is a question of trust or of mistrust vis-à-vis parents. And it is a fundamental issue in society. Should we trust the parent? Or should we, Jean-Baptiste, essayer de détailler the preventive measures to use your freedom, as it in the French case? Out of question. You do not have to argue why you are opting for homeschool. That's your choice, but also your responsibility. And it is not up to the state to detail preventive measures on 4 or 5 specific cases, and then you can eventually, exceptionally opt for homeschool. That is not a rule. So be more alert, be not afraid of taking floors at the international gremia, because you have a very strong point, namely parental involvement in education and children's rights. Thank you so much.
Professor de Groef, we thank you. You brought us an education that shows us the reality and the issues that we're faced with, and have taught us some of the principles that are key to us moving forward and where do we go from here on a legal perspective. Next on our agenda, and my privilege is to introduce Erica Demartino. Erica is a board member of GHEX, and I appreciate Erica's partnership so much. Erica's smile, even though for the last 3 years we've always been these little people You know the little people that you see on Zoom calls, and then when you get together and see each other, we're big. Well, not that big, but it's great to be together in person. Erica has been involved in so many things that are an encouragement to homeschoolers across Europe, particularly in Italy, where she's the founder of the Italian Homeschool Organization, and does numerous blogs and online activities. Erica has been key in organizing this conference, and I know you've met Erica a number of times before, but I just wanted to welcome Erica, and I'm looking forward to her thoughts and her sharing about where do we go from here. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good morning. I hope you're all doing well. Well, when I was in school, because I haven't been homeschooled, I studied history. Or rather, I studied facts about history. I memorized names, dates, events. History was a timeline of people and events. I don't know if you have a similar experience, but I didn't get a sense of how people were affected by events. There were no stories, just facts. And of course, these facts came from our textbooks. As a homeschooler mom, nowadays, I teach and I learn history along with my kids through the stories, the novels, memoirs, as textbooks don't seem to provoke critical thinking about issues, and they only speak about those big events. I really, really like to learn about those small events, the ones that are only apparently uneventful in history. You must know how it feels, right? You are homeschoolers. I guess I'm not the only nerdy mom that has many weird interests that often are not even my own. Let me explain. You know how it works. One of your children comes to you, right? And, they have this compelling need to know something, something very awkward. And they want to know it now. And so you're like, okay, let me see what I can do. And perhaps you go to the library, you get a few books, you go a search online, you find some web pages, and by the time you can give them a proper answer, they will have moved on. Excuse me, weren't you interested in hairdos in the 17th century? Oh no, Mom, I'm into manga now. Like, oh gosh. So this is how it's been going on for us. I, at that point, haven't moved on. I'm interested in those hairdos. I'm there trying to reproduce things and stuff. I turn into that fascinating 10-year-old, and I find myself staring at something like this. Oh my goodness. And as odd as it may seem, I can't really get enough of it. For example, let me give you an example. Golf ball design is a pretty interesting historical subject. Are there any here of you who are golfers? Anyone? No, somebody, a little bit? Okay. I have never held a golf club in my hand. I have never been on the golf courses, but I know a lot about golf ball design. I think that's a trait of homeschooling moms, learning about weird things. This is a wooden golf ball. There's no question that the first games of golf, as we know it today, were played using wooden golf balls. This is a specimen. Harboring the roots in the early 1400s on the eastern coast of Scotland, these original wooden golf balls were inefficient at best and likely made of hardwood, beech, boxwood. Can we have the other slide? I don't have the command. Whoa, there we go. Oh, this is an interesting one too. This is a feathery golf ball. Imagine, feather-stuffed leather golf balls. The first, you're like, where is she going? Have faith. The first real golf ball was known as a feathery golf ball, and it appeared in the 17th century. Basically, this feathery was a leather sack filled with boiled goose feathers. And then they stitched it up and they painted it. And, these were super expensive. They were very expensive. They were easily damaged. And only a privileged few could afford these. Do you know that an expert feathery ball maker could make only 4 in one day? So they were quite precious. And they didn't really work. And then, can we have the next slide? Oh, there we go. These are quite interesting. These are the Gutty golf balls. In the mid-1800s, a guy named Robert Adams Patterson made the first molded ball. They were made of sap, and it came from the sapodilla tree. It's a plant native to Malaysia. And these were the first golf balls that they had mass manufacturability. And what's interesting about these ones here is that while testing these golf balls, one man started to notice something a little bit strange. He developed a theory about it, and one day he came to work a little bit early because he wanted to test his theory. You know, he thought everybody would laugh about him, so he didn't want to be open. He just came a little bit earlier that morning. His theory was that the golf balls, like this one here, the ones that had been hit many times, the bruised ones, the rough ones, they traveled so much farther than the perfectly smooth ones did. And sure enough, guess what? He was right. He was right, because these tiny imperfections that you see create a thin layer of turbulence around the ball. I need my balls. And they reduce the drag, and they allow air to flow further and more smoothly around the ball. Well before the Wright brothers or any knowledge of aerodynamics, regular folk observed that those little nicks helped stabilize the ball in flight. So what do you think the people did at that point? They started hammering their balls. They started, punching them and getting all those blemishes and using them. As leaders in the homeschooling movement, we are called to serve families, no matter what the situation will be. And when we don't give up and we don't give in, the rough side of the mountain that we are called to climb actually molds us and shapes us into a person who can travel so much farther, who can touch so many more people. The blemishes, the scars, and the setbacks are what gives us the character to support and assist those who need our help. I think we all need a reminder. So I brought some for you. And you can just take it home. Here, we can pass them around. Just put it in your pocket. If you don't feel you need a reminder, well, pass it to someone else who needs it. But look at this beauty, We all need this. We all need to keep it in mind. Well, the question today is, where do we go from now? I can tell you that the arrival of the gutter ball revolutionized the game of golf and allowed it to spread to masses. And coming to think about it, the material used for those kind of molds, you know what the material was? It was iron. So, when I face injustice, and I speak to my friend homeschoolers here in Paris, for example, that have been going through so much, I can't help to think about the next generation of iron golf balls with incorporated dimples and bumps and blemishes, and they're made of iron. Iron is so strong, and they're going to go so far. All these challenges will just make us soar higher, further. I've been doing my best, I think you noticed here, to find the silver lining in life. It's not always easy, especially when it comes to the last couple of years, which have brought the European homeschooling community to fight for its rights in the UK, in France, in Portugal, just to name a few. It can be so difficult to watch friends endure hardship. A lot of what's going on feels outside of my control. I don't know if you feel like that, but I do. I've been trying to keep some perspective, though, and coming together today is certainly a benefit, because the friendship and the collaborations that we are consolidating here in Paris, thanks to the GHEX meeting, will certainly bear fruit. And being part of something bigger than me renews my hopes. Finding the upside to an adversity, really, really can change the way we cope, the way we see and we share challenges. Speaking of which, let me share something that happened in my home country, Italy. Because it's been 5 years now that the law changed in Italy, and they have made mandatory yearly examinations a necessity for homeschoolers. And it's starting at the age of 6. Quite recently, The parents of a 10-year-old homeschooler requested that the school board's decision to flunk their child in 5th grade, she's 10, it's primary school, they requested that it's canceled, to be canceled. They brought their case to court, and this is the first time that parents refused the school board's decision regarding the outcome of mandatory end-of-the-year examination. And the court rejected their request. The arguments that led to the judge's decision seem oriented and measured with the conceptual meter of the school paradigm. Homeschooling doesn't have to be school at home, as we know. You know, informal approaches find adequate and effective space in this choice. Thus, the term flunked, student, standard really have an empty meaning. In homeschooling, the concept of teacher and learner is deconstructed to make way for that of a self-guided learner, or better, mutual learning. We very well know that learning is not dependent upon teaching or schooling or any special environment. You know, although properly used, maybe these resources could enhance learning. In fact, there is a powerful subculture of independent learners who are responsible for much of the real progress that has been made in most areas on endeavor. In a passage of the legislative decree number 62 of the 13th of April 2017, which is the year where this yearly examination was made mandatory, it is clarified what is the purpose of this yearly examination. And I will quote, it says, "It has an educational training purpose and contributes to the improvement of learning." This is what they wrote. Yes, in this recent ruling, it seems that the attention has been placed on the acquisition of skills, of facts, like we were saying before, while the educational connotation has been classified as unimportant. It's an unimportant side effect. It is quite normal in the school environment, especially in the primary years, that a young person, even if not considered suitable for passing to the next class, will be enrolled and go forth. At least this is what happens in Italy. This happens because during the year, the teachers will hopefully implement recovery strategies. And some will also fear the detrimental consequences on the child's self-esteem, you know, because if she were to face rejection, that could be an issue. It is important to note that certified teachers who have obviously failed in their objective of teaching a student don't get questioned about it. Nothing, not at all. It's the student's fault, right? On the other hand, if these study goals are not achieved by a homeschooler, he or she can be flunked. Nobody stops to think about his self-esteem, her self-esteem. In this particular case, she's 10 years old. The school administration complains of having, and I quote, "no power to intervene on the teaching techniques and methods of preparation of the student." So it believes, by self-referencing, that the parents are unprepared because, you know, they're superficial, they're incompetent, I don't know, they're careless maybe. This statement overrides the first paragraph of Article 33 of the Italian Constitution, which is fundamental for homeschoolers. A quote, "Art and science are free, and the teaching is free." And it also overrides what is written in Article 31 of the same, which is, "The Republic facilitates families and the fulfillment of their tasks." And the task of education and instructions are primary of the family, which by choosing homeschooling also legitimately and fully assumes the public function that this entails. The unproven incapacity of these parents should not place them in a subordinate condition with respect of a function that the Italian Constitution in Article 30 attributes particularly to them. So by moving towards the preventive assertion of parent incompetence, a very questionable logical juridical step is taken. It appears that only accredited technicians know how to do better in terms of education, standards, listening to the child, organizing the child's time. The assertion that the institution is trustworthy and has privileges which are derived by faith appears like an easy exercise of self-referentiality. This legal case has caused regret and restlessness and absolutely did not contribute to the growth of collaboration between the institutions and the families. Yet, guess what? It has created a brand new dimple, a brand new bump. And now we know exactly what this is going to do for us, right? But they don't know. So let's keep going. Traversing the path of home education is inevitably going to give us a bumpy ride for children, parents, and leaders. Being homeschooling leaders means we may face some hardships, some ups and downs along the way regarding both our family's journey and that of those who we are supporting. Rather than where do we go from now, I would ask, how do we go from now? How do we go there? In these last years of chaos, I have been working on how to remain true to myself, to my values, to my growing community. Yet, often authenticity is exactly what we were shamed for. At most, a good number of homeschooling families experience pain for their uniqueness. Just like that little girl at the yearly examination who got rejected while she was expressing her intuition and character. In other words, her personal learning journey. Often people posture themselves away from rejection and tend to lean towards what? Approval. And what do they have to do to get someone's approval? Please them. And what do we have to do to please somebody? Well, generally we have to act like them. We have to think like them. We have to speak like them. We have to dress like them. We have to do what they do. And one of the most widespread diseases that inflicts humanity is the disease of being normal. Yet, I don't think anybody has ever achieved a sensational life in terms of quality and accomplishments by being normal. I don't know you. So please, right now, think of someone you really, really admire. Think of someone, it could be a relative, it could be a writer, it could be a politician, a leader, a friend. Just think of someone who you really admire, and I can almost guarantee you that there's going to be something different about this person. You wouldn't ever have noticed them if not. You wouldn't have been appreciating them if not. Our originality is what makes us great leaders, but it comes with a cost, the cost of risking, being uncertain, and vulnerable. I dream of a world for our children where we can all express ourselves and experience life, embodying the uniqueness of our own being. And let me tell you, this is the last one. This is the last story, I promise. In 2011, I was researching on unschooling because my first child was coming of age 6, and that's when in Italy, you have to decide whether to homeschool or to send them to school. In my heart, I knew very well what I wanted for him. It was crystal clear for his education, for his well-being, yet I felt exposed and unsure before those who stood judgingly in front of me, and I felt vulnerable. Luckily, exactly that year, I stumbled across a book that was entitled Et je ne suis jamais allé à l'école. And remember, I was asking you about someone who had impressed you. The author of this book taught me the importance to give my kids not only a choice, that it allowed me to to know that we all deserve the freedom to choose what matches our convictions, even if those all around us want to make us normal and acceptable. The writer of this book, like maybe you and certainly me, could be considered extravagant by some, yet his work is making a difference in the homeschooling community, and you will soon meet him. Finally, if the question is where do we go from now, well, here we go. You know very well, precisely, we go far. And as for the how, it is with renewed energy, strong enthusiasm, and no fear for all those bumps and blemishes that I might encounter that I go forth in my choice to serve homeschooling, knowing that we are all together on this mission. Thank you.
Erica, thank you. Your object lesson, the dimples, you've done it as only a homeschool mom in a special way, and I want to thank you for that because it's really special. Now, Erica, can I ask you to introduce our next guest? So Mike is just reminding me that he is not going somewhere for dinner or lunch. There's another event that some are attending. So Mike and Jean-Baptiste.
let me explain, because I would not miss my friend Andre Stern for anything, but there is a very large group of people here who we hope will support the work that we're doing. It's the independent, it's a, what is it, Libsco, it's the Libsco conference. It's the other conference that's happening. So myself, Jan, Alexandre, and Jean-Baptiste are going to speak to them right now to encourage them in what they're doing, but also to encourage them to support us and the people in France. So that's, I just felt like it was important for you to know that. So there he is, my friend, mon pote, comment ça va? Bienvenue.
Ça va, bonjour, bon matin à toutes et tous.
Hello.
Alors, Mike, à la prochaine fois.
Hi, Mike. See you soon.
So András Stern is a musician, guitar maker, author, and journalist. He is an expert in educational alternatives and works with various organizations, schools, and associations. 11 years ago, he gave me the strength and inspiration to be genuinely myself and have the kind of parent and child relationship I felt was the best for us, despite all the loud voices opposing us. So it's with gratitude that I welcome András Stern.
Bonjour, merci beaucoup. Je souriais avec plaisir à vous.
Thank you very much. I was smiling just hearing your voices earlier. Hello, everybody.
Je n'écris pas de texte.
I don't have anything written down. I'm speaking to the interpreters here because I don't prepare myself in advance.
J'utilise sciemment un langage simple.
But I will use simple language. I've thought a lot about how you've been speaking. I have half an hour, and I think I will dedicate this first half an hour to demonstrate something to you, and the second part to questions that I hope you will have. Otherwise, I have a lot of answers.
So I
was wondering about what I could say to you in 15 minutes. I have so many things to tell you. But to say about education and childhood in general, but we are representing childhood and education, while those of us who don't send our children to school. I'm a child myself, I'm 51 years old, but I never went to school. But I'm a very simple child, because what happened to me and what will happen to every child that we trust. I decided that I wanted to talk about trust and that I wanted to talk about freedom, because I feel that that is in danger. There's only one type of freedom, and when we have what we may seem to be a small freedom, we are going to use all of it. So I thought that we should use these 15 minutes, and it's already going by quickly, but I'm going to share with you what I would share with the Ministry of Education, or the Minister of Education, if I could, if they would have seen me. The minister met me a few months beforehand as an expert to participate in the conference on the 1,000 First Days of Childhood, but they didn't want to speak to me again. So I thought I would share with you what I would have said to him. I would have talk to him about our children and the attitude that we have in dealing with our children, because before the appearance of and creation of the education system, there is an attitude towards childhood, and that is what's important. And our attitude towards childhood as a society is top-down. It's in a dominant attitude, in that adults dominate over children. And this goes back to patriarchy, when it was decided that there would be categories, and that some categories of society would dominate others. And this is where the idea came that it would be possible. And another idea that is also incorrect is that children are the starting point for human development, and that the peak of this development is adulthood. As a preference, a white, male, heterosexual, and this is the peak of the pyramid, or the peak of human development, and a child would be the starting point. So if I were to say you are the starting point and I am the peak, then this is what it looks like. And this is how our world order was developed, starting from this idea that adults need to educate and raise children. Erziehen in German, which means to pull upwards, to allow this child to attain the peak of development. I've worked a lot with scientists. I don't know if it's something that you're familiar with, but it's something that's very important for me in my work. All of these books are written by scientists. All of these areas that are related to what we're talking about. And all of my colleagues write about subjects that are important to me. Science has also told us that we were wrong in our attitude towards children, because you can see their development is inverse in terms of human growth. Genetic programs that make us up, and this has been the case for tens of thousands of years, have been the same, and they will be the same for many years to come. And these genetic programmings cannot define where we come from and where we're going to go. We don't know if it's going to mean that we'll end up in an arid environment, having come from an ice age. And we just don't know. A child out in the woodlands will have to be able to recognize different shades of green in order to be able to survive. So then their intuition develops. And this develops in a child who lives in the country, but not in a child who lives in an urban area. But because our genetic programming isn't familiar with what we are up against or what they need to prepare us for, they equip us from birth with a range of human potential, anything possible, so that this potential will include what we need to survive in our environment, whatever that environment may be. That means that when we come into the world, we are real bombs of potential, because a child has all this potential in him, and they can become anything. And there's nothing that a child cannot become, be it a window cleaner or the President of the United States. There's nothing that the child can't learn. A child can become anything and can learn anything. A child is a giant of potential, and they can do anything that is possible. I was just saying about the nuances of green. It's something that you don't necessarily need to identify if you live in an urban area. This is something that you find more in the woodland, which is important to more nomadic tribes, says it's not required in the urban area. So this capacity or ability doesn't develop, it reduces. So these useless skills disappear and make room for skills that are required. But the skills that we require in our current environment are very few, only a couple of thousand, and everything else disappears. That means that during the first years and months of our existence, we experience a sort of hemorrhage where we lose all of the potential that we had, or the skills that we had and were born with. This means that development doesn't go from 0 to 100 as you would expect, but in a different direction, because we keep losing all of these skills. then at the end, what does that mean? We don't have many skills left. And do you know what we call that? An adult. And that has been scientifically proven. And because what has been scientifically proven has so much importance in our world, it can only change how we view a child. We can't see them as inferior because they have all the potential that we don't. That's what I would have started by telling the Minister of Education. And I would have talked about learning too. Because, yes, of course, learning is the most important thing, and we're prepared to do everything to allow a child to learn. But learning doesn't stop after childhood. It's an overarching fear of what might happen to a child that we don't educate. But learning, and I'm always happy to say from a scientific perspective, learning doesn't exist. It's drilled into us. But from a scientific perspective, it doesn't exist. Why doesn't it exist? For one simple reason, because we've mixed things up. We've misunderstood things. It's just that our brain isn't designed to record information. It's not designed to do that, and that's why it doesn't like to do it. You probably noticed that it's impossible and just pointless to try and do that. So why has our brain been optimized? Well, evolution has made us this way. Why? Our brain has been optimized to problem solve, to find the solution to problems, and this is the favorite activity of our brain, and that's what it does best. This is interesting because when we are finding a solution to a problem that affects us, if we come up against a piece of information that allows us to find a solution or allows us to solve our problem, then two things happen to this piece of information. Firstly, we understand, and understanding information is more important than memorizing it. A piece of information that allows us to problem solve is immediately retained, so it's remembered and memorized for the rest of our life. Something that allows us to problem solve, this piece of information is remembered forever. To give you a bit more of a technical input, a piece of information that is not of interest to us goes in one ear and out the other. Does that mean anything to you? Because for something to be remembered, a piece of information needs to activate our emotional senses, and so if it doesn't, we don't remember it. Which brings us into a society of people that have forgotten over 80% of things that they had to learn. 80%. That's all of you. Maybe not all of you who have followed this unusual path, of which the topic is today, but this applies to the majority of people who live in our society. Statistics, 80% of what you had to learn, you've forgotten it. And as a society, we've accepted it, because otherwise people wouldn't accept spending so much time on something that's so inefficient. We have made it completely acceptable to get a prize and forget about it. If someone asks you a question and you've forgotten it, you'll say, oh, I learned that at school, I was very good at it, but I've forgotten it now. And someone else will say, well, that's the same for me. But if you don't know how to answer the same question and you say that you've never learnt the answer to that question, then that could make you feel upset. It doesn't give you the same reaction for the same result, depending on whether you've learnt it or not, but the outcome is the same. So 80% of what you learn is forgotten. So this 20% of what you haven't forgotten is the 20% that affected you, that moved you, that had an impact on you emotionally or in the research that you may have carried out. It was probably related to something that you were interested in, or it helped you solve a problem, or you have an emotional link to the person who gave you that piece of information, and that is why today you haven't forgotten it. So that leads me to the last observation. Learning doesn't exist because we can't learn. Learning is something that occurs. It's something that's imposed on us. So there's a huge misunderstanding because in our world order we have mixed up learning and learning by heart. Learning by heart, or accumulating information that is of no interest to us, something that leaves a bad impression or bad memories, is completely ineffective. We can learn things by heart. We can even force people to learn things by heart, but we could never learn because it's not linked to our emotions. It's just something that happens. Learning is not something that we do. Learning is something that happens to us. I have a few minutes left, so I'll say another thing that I wanted to tell the minister. I'm going to talk about how these emotions are activated, how we retain this information. Is there an intrinsic way of activating this information? Can we maybe put a button or a switch and you press on it? And that activates your emotions and allows you to retain all this information. Maybe there's a substance or a method that will activate your emotions. No. A number of things have been tried, but your emotions are intrinsically activated. But there is one thing that activates your emotions, and that is playing. Playing. What all children do as soon as we leave them alone. So this is an issue that everybody knows the answer to. When we leave children alone, when we trust them, they play. That means that instinctively, children dedicate themselves to the only human activity that allows them to activate their emotions, the state at which we understand and memorize the information that is put in front of us. And if it was only up to them, if we were interested in what interests them, if we didn't interrupt them, if we allowed them to play and considered this a sacred activity, then we know children would continue to play all day long, all week, all month, all year, all their lives. Why has no one wondered about what would happen to a child if we let it play for its whole life? Why has no one wondered what would happen if we let our child play for 51 years? What would happen at the end? It will be, they'll turn into an adult who can't read, completely illiterate, who'll live in chaos, who'll have no structure, no discipline, no strength. There's a lot of ideas. They're only ideas, though. Nobody, no one has tried it. No one has had the guts to try it. Why? Why am I one of the only person, probably not in this conference today, but in all the conferences that I do, and I do a lot and I write a lot of books, I'm usually the only person that can answer all of the questions that you're wondering about, to what happens to a child that you just left to play for 51 years. Not who was homeschooled, but who was unschooled. Maybe you have some questions. I've just gone over my 15 minutes, but I think we have until 5 to, so 10 minutes for questions.
If you don't have any questions, I have many answers to give you anyway.
Thank you very much. My question is, what would you recommend us to read on this topic you've just shared with us on self-directed play?
There are a lot of books that I can recommend. But since he will give you a speech later, I recommend Peter Gray's books, or my books, for that matter. I've written on all topics that are dear to my heart. My very first book that was mentioned earlier. My book that is called Play, and the one that you can see behind me on the rituals of childhood. Because in my books, I try to compile all the scientific evidence I have found. Of course, I am advertising my books, but it's also because I haven't found actual books, except for Peter Gray's books, that are practically observing things and that are taking stock of current scientific knowledge on homeschooling and on those issues. And I am a homeschooled child, and since I'm doing homeschooling too, I just don't want to advertise my own books, but since you're asking me which books I am recommending, I'm recommending Peter Gray's books. So outside of those, look at mine then.
Merci. Bonjour.
Good morning. My name is Herman. I come from Spain. My wife is the secretary of our association. She's with Juan, our child. And you are the pillar of our association in Spain. You are someone that we deem very important, and it is very important for us to meet you today. And our question is, what kind of advice could you provide to us? The situation is difficult from a political point of view in Spain, so I don't know what type of advice you could provide to us to face that difficult political situation. And thank you for being with us today. We are highly emotional and very moved to see you. Thank you. The issue is that I can't see you in 3D, unfortunately, for several reasons. But I'm highly grateful that we have this technology that enables us to share emotions, and I'm very moved as well to hear your question. The political situation is difficult in every country. There's a whole wave of political panic. Politicians are seeing that their chair is vibrating, so they're trying to tighten as much as possible all the legislative tools that they have against us and to restrict our liberties. So I don't really know the Spanish political situation too well, so I'm not sure I can provide you some legal advice. I'm sure other people will do that better than me. But as I am doing it in France for now, because of course there's a lot of worrying crackdown on homeschooling, I really want to tell you about my dad. My dad, Henri Stern, is a living sacred monster of the education, but a good one. And he is like the Montessori. He's a master when it comes to education. My dad experienced a childhood under the circumstances that we deem as being the worst. It was during the Second World War, as a Jewish person born in Germany. So his childhood was during the Second World War, and he had to flee the Nazi regime. So you can imagine that he had lost all his references, and they had to leave their things behind them to flee from the Nazi regime, and they were. The sky was on fire, and they had this daily fear. They felt hunger, and they had this fear because even someone who was going to the same school as you could just destroy it just because the law said so. So you have to put yourself in their shoes. You have to imagine this lack of material security. So you can imagine this, and you can imagine those are the worst conditions for a child to grow. But if you ask my dad, who's 98 years old today and who's still working, what he found of his childhood, he said that it was great. And so this is astonishing. So how can he have a great childhood when he experienced the Second World War? And his answer is easy, because we were all connected. My parents were connected to me, I was connected to them, so they gave me this reference point, this emotional harbor, if you want. So this emotional security that made me feel safe. So I wasn't feeling safe in my environment, but I felt safe with my parents. And my parents told me to love humankind, and they considered that playing was crucial, no matter the war circumstances. So this may be an answer to your question. We are all obsessed by several things. But as parents, we are obsessed. As teaching parents, we are obsessed with creating a prepared environment for our children. However, the environment might be important, but this is secondary to this connection, to this feeling of being safe. So in spite of all the difficulties, our children will say that their childhood was great. We might be afraid of material lack of safety, but we should focus on connections, and I hope this might bring you some solace in this difficult period. Also, our children become as we see them. And this has been the rationale behind my work in the past 15 years. If you have one thing to remember, our children become as we see them. So if we see them as small things, needing our educational measures, that's what they will become. If we see them as full of potential, this is what they will become, no matter the circumstances. And if we want our children to be satisfied adults, we will have to live through their gaze. So I hope my answer will help you. And thank you for your question. And please say hi to your wife and anyone else from your association. I have a question as well. Thank you for your testimony. This is very encouraging. But I also have a question. You're talking about this lack of material safety and talking about emotional connections. Did your parents stay with you? Because I feel like I am separated from my children when they go to school. So is there a difference between material insecurity and physical insecurity? And the impossibility of being with your parents, your family, and for hours in France, you are at school for hours and hours. Is there a difference between the two? Yes, of course, there is a difference, especially because everyone is unhappy in this situation. My dad was not with both his parents because men and women were separated when they fled the Nazi regime, but he was always with one of his parents. I was telling about unschooled children. You're talking about a family difficulty, but you are not in the situation in which you would like to be. However, I don't know if this will be reassuring or not, but I encourage you to find solutions, to think whether or not France should be the country in which you live in, or find new solutions, or wait for new solutions to arise. I don't know what to do. My two children in France benefit from an exemption, but soon it will change because of the new law. So should we leave France? That is a question. And I don't have the answer to that question. So for now, I want to live naively. But what I can tell you, I'm not sure whether or not this will be reassuring to you, but maybe it will help you accept what's not acceptable while we find a solution. But in my journey, when meeting many children, I've noticed that the future of their children depended on the behavior of their parents. My time is running up, so I will try to answer fast. I've met with children who are schooled, and their parents have a new behavior. This new behavior I started to mention earlier. So if parents have this new behavior with school children, these children will have a similar experience as my experience. But I know unschooled children, and their parents are still have the old behavior, this dominant behavior towards these children that stems from patriarchy. So these unschooled children with parents in this old behavior, even though they're not going to school, their childhood will be similar to the one to school children. So you have unschooled children that go through a schooled childhood, and the other way around.
alors qu'ils vont à l'école parce que leurs parents sont dans une nouvelle attitude.
So it all comes down to your behavior. I'm not sure if this is a solace of some kind or if it helps, but I'm hoping it will help.
J'ai théoriquement atteint ma limite.
So I think I've reached my time limit.
Thank you very much. Are there any more questions? I think we reached our maximum time. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. Very insightful and very enthusiastic, Andre. Thank you. Still, you changed my life 11 years ago with the book. Thank you so much. Inspiring. So now we have the pleasure to meet a friend, a supporter of homeschoolers. I always wish there were more lawyers at these meetings, especially in my country, in Italy. It's very difficult. I don't know what your experience is to find trustworthy lawyers who know their way, who can support homeschooling. Right now, we're going to introduce Hubert Vauvy, who has a master's degree in public affairs from the Institut d'études politiques de Paris and a master's degree in public law from the University of Paris. He has worked at the General Management of Social Cohesion in Paris, and he chairs the association Liberté Éducation, which promotes and defends homeschooling here in France. And he has been heard at the Assembly and the Senate on this issue. So thank you so much for being here, Hubert. It's a pleasure to have you.
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everyone.
Vous parler en détail de la situation française.
I could delve into further details when it comes to the legal background and legal constraints of homeschooling in France. But first and foremost, I would like to tell you what the future prospects are. I will not give you legal arguments, but of course, if you have detailed questions, we can always talk about the legal dimension. As a public law lawyer, I have defended several families, and I know how complex the French legal system is. So from a political point of view, we have weapons or tools that we do not sufficiently use to show that families are a great driver. To me, there are 6 political challenges or 6 arguments to convince France or any other country that home education is essential. First, families are a great driver for the well-being of children. What is important in France right now is to notice that there are many political topics being talked about. For example, there are many reports written on bullying, on child pornography. We've received a report that was horrifying from the Senate on child pornography, the fact that you leave school, the addiction to schools, the addiction to screens. So seeing home education as a solution has been demonized, but especially by Macron's cabinet. So what's at stake here is to show that nowadays that it is our fight. And when I was at the Senate or at the State Council, we're seeing obstacles being raised. And now they said that you only have 3 months to ask for an authorization. And we need to keep fighting by saying that this is not acceptable. This was not part of law before. For years, parents have had the opportunity, the right to take their children out of school for several months or several years to rebuild their lives. So we should say that this is totally unacceptable, and that parents it is unacceptable that parents are trapped because of the school system, and that children are trapped in a school system that doesn't make them feel well. And we know that it's hard for a parent to find another school during the school year for their children to feel better. So this is our political fight. And what's astonishing is that there are many political topics being dealt with, and we're not envisaging home education as a solution. Second essential argument, home education should be seen as a cohesion tool. In France, we have a policy that separate families from little children. We are the only country in which children need to go to school from the age of 3, the only country in which a school finishes at 5:30 p.m. We're talking about encouraging school from the age of 2. We're encouraging children to go to kindergarten from the age of 1. And I've even seen a bill from the Socialist Party in France that wanted to work on contributions given to families, especially if they were putting their children in kindergarten from the age of 1.
So we have these facts, and also we're talking about education dropout, which is leading to a number of teachers who can't stand their job anymore. And it's allowed parents to rediscover their child. And they finally understood how their child learns, what their difficulties are. And it was difficult for some families, but really a moment of awareness for others. It's time that the state becomes aware of this gift, that families and children were able to spend time together. But in spite of that, the state seems to be taking the opposite decision. Political tendency is to work more on preventing people or separating people from their families and their children. It's essential for the well-being of the child to be educated at home, for the well-being of the families. I'm sure you're familiar with families that are split up, but it's an opportunity for families and children to understand one another. This gift that parents, or that we, are doing by dedicating our time, by giving up our extra salary, it's a gift. And the child is grateful for it, for this time that we will spend. It's relief for them. I worked from home for 2 or 3 years, and I saw this change in my children just because I was there at lunchtime. Thirdly, education at home is really a work of talent. There are several reasons for encouraging home education, helping children with artistic talent or sporting talent. It's not something that you can encourage throughout traditional schooling. If a child shows these new talents throughout the school year, when their teachers hadn't seen it coming, the teacher will say that it's not possible to focus on that, and it doesn't make sense. Because if you want your children to have talent, you have to allow them to develop that talent. And I've been shocked by the skills that children have developed through extracurricular activities, which they wouldn't have been able to do if they were in traditional schooling system. Artists and artistic talents and other talent that we deprive them from. People live and die like pale photocopies. And if we are destroying their talent, we are just creating photocopies of people and children who won't know what they're able of doing and who will be constantly searching for themselves because they won't know what they want to be or what they like, and will have monotonous children. And what's happened today, when you hit 30 or 40, you see people who are changing careers. And it's a huge upheaval. And it's just simply because our children weren't able to recognize their skills. It doesn't make sense to spend so much money on their schooling if we can't give them the freedom to discover their own talent. So that's the third thing. Fourthly, and it may seem a bit absurd to you, but it's an ecological conversion. How many families have we met who decide to go back to basics? It's a brave decision, especially following lockdown. They've chosen to live in a more rural area because they want to get back to basics and renew their links with the earth. And I'm one of those families. We moved to the Maine-et-Loire, the Sarthe, 45 minutes away from Tours. My wife is an avid permaculture enthusiast. And 2 of my children out of 5 are in their last year of nursery, but they spend their days outside. They have 2 hours a day of lesson time, and then they're outside. They're learning about nature, something that other children their age don't have the ability to do. And we have been able to make this choice, to have this more ecological way of living. Home education, or this law which is trying to put an end to it, is forcing families who have their own learning systems to drive 50 or 60 kilometers to a school to put their children in a system that they don't like. It makes you use your car every day, and they'll have to follow a system that they don't want to. We're in a world where finally the environment is becoming of utmost importance, or is more and more people are becoming aware of the environment. We can talk about electric vehicles, but you know that if you live in the countryside and you try and use your electric vehicle, it will be difficult. So what will happen? Well, the price of petrol is already through the roof. The price of diesel, the price of petrol, which impacts families who have who don't necessarily have the means for that, because if there's homeschooling is taking place, then usually one parent isn't working. And it can have a tragic effect on the family. There was one other point that I wanted to make, which was learning innovation. You could say that each family is almost like a startup, and they have a way of innovating their learning and education methods. For example, the fathers encourage their children to take part in carpentry and make furniture, write theatre pieces, plays. There's something that makes me think of Rabelais, who was talking about the Abbaye de Thélème, saying, do what you like. This world of innovation, it can also go hand in hand with distance learning. I mean, families have a way of finding a balance.
de toute une série d'innovations pédagogiques.
And we're depriving ourselves from this learning innovation which traditional schools are not able to implement. And these parents who have taken part in home education for 10, 15 years are not heard, especially when it comes to training new teachers. If we just listen to them, I think that they would have some serious educational experience to share. And the irony of it all is that in this separatist law, we told parents to value what their children have been able to learn or acquire, the skills they've been able to acquire. So that they then could become teachers themselves. And these parents who were subjected to traditional exams and A-levels, it's another France, a France of diplomas, baccalaureate. A lot of children do homeschooling during their primary studies, and then they have to go and do their baccalaureate. There's something that we can take away, and that is that parents know their children. And that knowledge is irreplaceable. If the person that you're trying to speak to is completely unaccepting of what you're saying, you can talk to them about the savings that you are making. There's no link made. There's a current school crisis, there's a lack of teachers, a lack of public funding, and never do we say that we're the ones that carry everything. We pay our taxes. But we are not a drain on the national education system. So I think that that's something that we need to value. In France, there are two legal battles. Firstly, it's so that to implement a new law, it's something that we need to achieve. There are a number of proposals in France, but there's nothing that is discussed. So we need to really take part in lobbying to be able to allow these bills to be made into law, so that we escape this authoritarian regime. And then secondly, there's another fight, which is the interpretation or the understanding of the law. In France, we're great at making laws, and also creating laws that are unclear. We have the situation that is unique to children, a law in France, and it means that everybody can have a differing point of view. And if rectorates, just thinking about children, some will reject the public system, some will reject the family education system, and others will think about, oh, the situation of children. Okay, well, the Constitution has defined this already and has said that it is when we provide an education to a child that is adapted to a child. So it is unique to the child and the situation of the child itself. There are two appeals that have been placed before the Senate, and we are waiting for an outcome. If they allow us, if the State Council allows us to authorize parents to make the decision, that will mean that all we had to do was make an appeal to allow us to make a decision for the child. If you see today the number of incomprehensible refusals for parents who have presented their case, they had everything that they needed to teach their children. We had former teachers who had designed a home education program that was denied to them. They're incomprehensible. In France, it's the State Council who really directs things, and we have very little guarantee. It's very strange to see France, which is supposed to be a country of human rights, that there are so few guarantees. I'll give you an example. There's the Constitutional Council, which is very political based. Laurent Fabius, the president of the council, is very decisive. We saw throughout COVID that they were unable to meet their requirements. And the State Council, we saw in the past that, well, they provided a first piece of feedback on this project, which they then did a 360 on. The members of the ministerial cabinet don't work together with the State Council, so we really have a difficulty there. And lastly, there's no inspector body in France. The rectorate really is the one that is the body that performs all the inspections, but there's no representation for families who take part in homeschooling. There's no representation. And another weakness, these families who see their authorizations denied, if the judge says no, they can only wait for the State Council to make a decision, which can take up to a year. So for a year, they can't do anything, and this is why I suggest that we change the law and change how the law is understood. Really important. Thank you.
Are there any questions? We have a few minutes for questions. Nope. Very well. Thank you very much. It was great. Thank you. Right now, again, we are going to connect to Zoom because we have the pleasure to have today as well Peter Gray, who is a researcher and professor of psychology and neuroscience at Boston College, who has conducted and published research in neuroendocrinology, developmental psychology, anthropology, and education. He is an internationally acclaimed author. I am an avid reader personally of his blog, his regular blog called Freedom to Learn for Psychology Today magazine. He is one of the founders of the nonprofit Alliance for Self-Directed Education and of the nonprofit Let Grow, the mission of which is to renew children's freedom to play and explore independently of adult control. So for him, it's almost 5:30 in the morning, I think. So let's see if he is connected. I am not sure from the studio by the side if he is there.
Hear me?
Welcome, welcome, Peter. Thank you for being here at the GHEX meeting in Paris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess, can everybody hear me? Is there any difficulty with the connection? I'm going to talk about I guess the title for our whole session this morning is Where Do We Go From Here? I'm going to talk about the future of home education and how we might work towards that future. As many of you know, I have long been involved in conducting research into self-directed education, have become an advocate of self-directed education as a result of that research and other people's research. And so I'm going to talk about the future of home education and self-directed education as a unit. I'm going to start with a definition of education, the same definition I gave yesterday morning, but I think it bears repeating, that education is everything that a person learns that enables that person to live a satisfying, a meaningful, and moral life. However you learn it, education is not the same thing as learning. You can learn things that don't help you live a satisfying, meaningful, and moral life. You can learn trivia that is irrelevant to your future life. You can learn false information that inhibits, interferes with your future life. You can learn bad habits and so on and so forth. So education is that learning that has long-lasting beneficial effects. Education, self-directed education is education that comes through the normal course of life. As you face life, you face obstacles and you learn how to overcome those obstacles. As you go through life, you also develop interests, curiosity, you pursue those interests. As you go through life, you also realize that to achieve certain goals, to achieve things that you want to achieve as you're in your life, there are certain things you have to learn, and so you dedicate yourself to learning those things. Those are all part of self-directed education. My research indicates that this works. Children come into the world really biologically designed for self-education. They're good at it, but they need the opportunity to do it. They need lots of time to do it. They need the resources to do it. They need access to other people. They need access to other kids. So in an age-mixed environment, especially, they need access to experts. They need access to tools to pursue what they want to pursue. And so the adult's job in self-directed education is to provide such access, to make sure that children have the opportunity to educate themselves in the ways that that are meaningful to them and that will lead to a meaningful and satisfying life for them. So what is the future of home education? My prediction, which some might say is an optimistic prediction, is that over time, more and more families will opt for home education. They'll be opting out of conventional schooling, what I call coercive schooling or imposed schooling, to use perhaps a gentler term for it. And so more and more people will be doing this, and that an increasing percentage of people opting out of imposed schooling will be choosing some form of self-directed education. Most of these people will be officially registered as home educators, or as we say in the United States, homeschoolers. And that will be the legal route out of imposed coercive schooling. I think that among those who are opting out of coercive schooling, who are opting into home education, an increasing number will be, in one way or another, adopting self-directed education for the children. Homeschooling always, in my experience, involves more self-directed education than standard schooling does. Parents allow their children to pursue their interests, even in parents who are imposing a curriculum of sorts, recognize that the curriculum works better if the children have some say in what that curriculum is, and if they allow the kinds of flexibility in what the child is doing that schools really cannot allow the way that they are constructed. So these trends are already occurring in the United States. As I said yesterday, homeschooling is growing. It's growing rapidly in recent years. The most recent polls indicate that something like 11% of school-age children in the United States are being homeschooled rather than going to the state school or to some private school that's similar to the state school. This is a really remarkable trend that's occurring. It was it had started before COVID, but it was stimulated by COVID, and it appears that people who have left the standard schools, partly because of COVID, many of them are not going back to it. And the trend, I think, towards leaving schools will continue. I think that there are a number of reasons for this trend away from coercive schools. I mean, we've had this idea, we've had the idea of self-directed education around for a long, long time. I mean, Summerhill celebrated its 100th anniversary recently. These are not new. The evidence that this works is not new. So why do I think that now is the time that these ideas are going to really blossom, that people are going to really understand and leave the coercive school system that we have throughout the world? I think there's 4 reasons for it. One has to do with the increased toxicity of standard imposed schooling. My data comes from the United States, but I think similar things are happening in other parts of the world. Over the last few decades, school has become far more toxic to children than it was before. And part of the reason is the hierarchy of educational control, the greater control by the government. Schools used to be more controlled locally in the United States. Now they're controlled top down by the government. Teachers have much less flexibility of what they can do. The focus is on standardized testing and drill for testing, which is the least interesting, most boring, most painful in many ways, most useless kind of educational experience that you can have. And school is taking over children's time. The school year has become longer than it used to be. The school day has become longer. We've eliminated recess in many elementary schools in the United States. School has become an environment that does not understand childhood, that really makes childhood relatively impossible. Even elementary school children are going home with lots of homework, so even after school, they don't have the freedom that they once had. You know, when I was a child many, many years ago, we had school, but it didn't consume our lives the way that school does today for children. And so parents are seeing this. It's interfering with children's opportunities to be children. It's interfering with family life. It's taking over family life. Parents have to spend their time focusing on helping the child do homework and making sure the child does it, getting the child off to school, and so on and so forth. And so family life becomes centered around school, and more families are simply not willing to do that as school moves farther and farther in these directions. The second, and in addition to that, we see there's more and more evidence about the stress of school. As we become more oriented towards high stakes testing, children are being convinced that if they somehow failed on these tests, especially by the time they're in high school, their life is going to be ruined, they'll be homeless. We're stressing children out at levels that we have never done before. The levels, at least in the United States, of anxiety and depression and suicide among school-age children are at record levels. Huge increases in all of these over the last few decades as we have increased the pressure of schooling. And so parents are seeing this, and more are taking their child out of school because of this. A second reason is that people are leaving is the recognition that self-directed education works. As we have more research showing that it works, showing that children who have pursued self-directed education grow up well and do well in the world, as more and more people are going in this direction, more and more other people see them going in this direction and see that it works. Perhaps the most convincing evidence for most people is not academic research, but the knowledge that your neighbor down the street is allowing their child to pursue their own interests, and that child seems to be doing well. And maybe they've got an older child who's now an adult and who's doing well in the world. That's quite convincing. That's the kind of evidence that's convincing. And as more and more people are doing it, more and more people will know people who are doing it and will have first-hand evidence that this is not a disastrous thing to do. This is quite a beneficial thing to do. So that is, I think, part of what's happening. This is kind of what has been referred to as by social scientists as the tipping point theory of social change. At first, there are kind of brave people who make this change. They are stepping into the wilderness in a certain sense. And then other people see, oh, that seemed to work out well for them. Let me try it. And pretty soon enough people are doing it that everybody sees that this works. And then you have a large change in the direction of this social change. So I think that is part of what is happening. So the third reason that I think that this trend is going to continue to occur has to do with the increased ease of pursuing self-directed education. It's never been easier than it is now to pursue self-directed education. It used to be that you kind of had to go to the source of knowledge if you wanted knowledge. Knowledge was sequestered in certain places. It was in books. You had to go where the books were. It was in the experts. You had to go where the experts were. That's the whole reason why universities were developed and then subsequently why schools were developed. Knowledge wasn't universally available as it is today. Now, of course, we've all got, any question you want, any information you want, you can Google it, you can find it, you can find YouTubes, you can find people, you can find the world's experts talking to you about it. You can find chat groups who are interested in discussing these ideas with you. There's no end to the routes that you can find information, that you can educate yourself. Modern technology has democratized knowledge. And children growing up know this. They know they don't have to go and listen to a lecture in person. They don't have to go to a place where there are books. They can find all this information. They can download books. They can see YouTubes, they can see experts showing you exactly how to do this or how to do that. Schools have not caught up to this, but children have, and many families have now. And so I think that's a big part of the reason why there's going to be a growing trend, a growing understanding that you don't have to send your child to school for that child to become educated. So another reason for the increased ease in pursuing self-directed education is that more and more people, as more and more people are doing it, there are more and more, those people doing it are creating more and more facilities to enable it. So, for example, in the United States, in recent times, there's been a rather large growth in what are sometimes called micro schools, or in learning centers or recreation centers, play centers, by homeschoolers who recognize that their children need contact with other children, they need contact with other adults, they need opportunities outside of the home. And as there are an increasing number of homeschoolers, they get together and form those opportunities. One of the effects of that is once you have learning centers and once you have, sometimes they're parent co-ops, sometimes they are they're learning centers in the form of similar to schools, similar to democratic schools that get formed that support self-directed education. Once you have that, then you're enabling a whole new group of people to take their children out of school. Well, those are people where neither parent can stay home. Both parents are employed during the day. either out of necessity or because of desire. And so they can now have a place for their child to be during the day that is not a coercive schooling center, but is a center that supports the child's self-directed education. And as more and more people leave schools, there will be more and more of those opportunities. I've recently conducted research along with 2 librarians on libraries as centers for self-directed education. An increasing number of libraries in the United States are recognizing that some of their most frequent patrons are homeschoolers, and they're developing special programs for homeschoolers. An increasing number of libraries, at least in the United States, now have maker spaces in them. So children are the biggest users. Children and teens are the biggest users of these maker spaces. They're using modern technology to create things. This is constructive play. Libraries are recognizing increasingly that the best use of these spaces is to let the young people explore and learn how to do these things, and they do this socially. This is true self-directed education, and libraries are very much behind this. There are also a number of libraries that have instituted free play at the library, free age-mixed children's play, in some cases inside the library as well as outside the library. One library that where the library where these 2 librarians were part of the research that I conducted has now after school free play at the library. They put up a big sign that says joyful noise welcome. They tell patrons that if you want quiet, there's quiet rooms where you can go. But the library is open for children's play, both inside and outside. And there's a growing number of libraries, still a small number, but a growing number of libraries who are recognizing this need for places for children to congregate and play, and are trying to meet that need. So I have long felt that libraries are going to be the replacement for what we now call schools. Schools have always been places for forced education. Libraries have always been places for self-directed education. I believe that as local communities free up their budget from schools, as more and more people are leaving schools, there will be more and more opportunity to fund libraries, to create learning centers within the library, to create all kinds of educational opportunities within the library, which are self-directed opportunities. A final reason, a 4th reason for my belief that there's going to be a continued boom in self-directed education, and especially through home education, is the fit of self-directed education with the modern economy. It's becoming more and more obvious that the kinds of skills that schools inculcate are not valuable skills today. We don't need people who can do routine, boring work. We've got robots for that. Schools were designed to teach children to tolerate tedium, to do things that they are directed to do, and to do things in exactly the way that they're directed to do. We don't need people who can do that. We've got robots to do that kind of thing. We also don't need people who can memorize a lot of information and feed it back, which is what schools train children to do. We've got Google for that. Any information you want, you can find with a couple of clicks of your thumb. So we don't need that. What we do need are people who are creative, people who can innovate, people who have moral standards, people who have social abilities. And these are the things that are fostered by self-directed education. These are the things that are fostered by experience in the real world, by experiences where children and young people need to develop their own curriculum, need to figure out what they want to do, and are allowed lots of time to play and explore. Play, by definition, is always creative. It's always innovative. It is how children learn to create and innovate. So self-directed education is the route to success in the modern economy. Schooling is not providing the skills that the modern economy needs. And I think more and more people are recognizing that. So now what do we do to foster this trend? I think the main thing we need to do is to be sure that home education is legal. And I know this is a huge issue in much of Europe. It's also an issue in the United States. I think as more and more people leave school, there's going to be a faction that's going to want to counter that leaving school, that's going to want to make it more difficult for home education to occur. That's going to want to regulate it in some way. So after all, there's many people employed in our schools. There's a lot of financial interest in continuing schools pretty much as they are. And so there's going to be kind of a backlash about it. And we need to be prepared for that, and we need to know how to counteract it. We need to use all the forces that we can to bring together people who support home education and self-directed education to work, to be sure that the laws remain in such a way that it's possible to take your child out of school and that the state does not interfere with that. If the state says, well, you can home educate, but you've still got to follow the state curriculum, that undermines home education. That undermines the purpose of it, which is to provide what the child needs and wants, rather than to provide what that unique child needs and wants, rather than to provide some kind of curriculum that's the same curriculum for everybody, that is a state-determined curriculum rather than a child-determined curriculum. So that's a huge challenge. And we also need to, as part of that challenge, need to develop connections among homeschoolers, develop lobbying groups among homeschoolers, and also by connections among homeschoolers, continue to work towards ways of making homeschooling easier for more people, where both families need to work, by developing out-of-home centers for play and exploration and learning. So I want to conclude now by describing briefly what I see as a vision for the future of education. I described this a while ago in one of my blog posts. I write a regular blog for Psychology Today, and I have this vision of what will replace our current K through 12, as we call it in the United States, system of education and university, because I think also the idea that everybody has to go to university, has to go to get a bachelor's degree no matter what you're going to do in life is also an obsolete idea. It's an idea that has been growing in recent times, but I think at least in the United States is finally beginning to decline. Fewer and fewer people we're on a trend now towards fewer people going on to university than before. So here's my prediction about the future of education. I predict that we will have what I think of as a three-stage system, if you want to call it system. That's a little bit too formal a term for it, of education. The first stage is the stage of discovery, the stage of self-directed learning, learning about the world, learning who you are, learning how you fit in this world. And this is basically what would replace what we now think of as elementary and high school education. It would occupy roughly the first 15 to 18 years of a person's life, and it's self-directed, really self-discovery, learning about the world as it's meaningful to you, learning how you fit in the world requires self-direction. It requires that you're in charge of this, that you are figuring out who you are figuring out what the world is for you. And so the supports for self-directed education that I've described previously and written greatly about need to be provided during this time, whether it is occurring in libraries, whether it's occurring in learning centers like Agile Learning Centers, whether it's occurring in homeschool co-ops, places where that are well designed for children to make these kinds of discoveries about themselves and about their place in the world. by the time that children are 15 to 18 years old, sometime in their mid to late teens, children would have developed some kind of a sense of what they might want to do to make a living in this world, a realization they're not always going to be supported by their parents. How do they want to support themselves? What would be a meaningful kind of career for them? And so the second stage of education in this vision is exploring career paths. This would be a system of apprenticeships, of low-level jobs. So currently, if you, let's say you decide, just to illustrate this, let's say that a young person decides for one reason or another that they think they would like to be a doctor, a medical doctor. Maybe they've known doctors, maybe they've had experience with doctors. It leads them to think that this would be a fine life to be a doctor. Currently, if you want to be a doctor, you would go to the next step would be to go to a 4-year bachelor's degree before you go to medical school. In which you would learn nothing about doctoring. You would take some science courses, you would take some courses that might in some ways help you prepare you intellectually for being a doctor, but you don't have any kind of real practical experience that helps you know if you really would like to be a doctor or not. So in my vision, if you wanted to be a doctor, the next stage would be to some kind of a low-level job or apprenticeship. Maybe you'd be an orderly, maybe you'd be assistant to a nurse, where you get an idea. Do I like being in the hospitals? Do I like being around sick people? Do I have the patience that it requires to be a doctor? And as I look at the doctors that I get to know in this kind of a low-level job, do I want that kind of a life? So you're having real experience that helps you make an informed decision before you invest a lot of money and time and education towards being a doctor. You are getting a practical education in what it is to be a doctor. So then let's say that you decide as a result of that, yeah, I really do like the life of being a doctor. Then you would be applying to medical school. And what would you apply to medical school on the basis of? Partly recommendations from real doctors and people who have seen you in this environment, who say that you've got the personality, you've got the drive and so on to do that. But then the medical school might say, well, you know, this is all fine and good, but we would want you to take a couple of courses before you come, maybe in organic chemistry and microbiology, to be sure that you can handle the intellectual aspect of it. So then you would take those courses. There would be institutions that would offer those kinds of courses, and that would be then evidence. But the medical school would decide what is it that you really need. You're not going to 4 years. You're not spending the money and time for 4 years. You're taking a couple of courses that are relevant to the medical school's decision to accept you or not. So that would be but no matter what you're going in, whether you're going, maybe you try, you work as an orderly or an assistant nurse, and you decide you don't want to be a doctor, then you try a different kind of apprenticeship or a different low-level job. Notice that you are, instead of spending money at this point, you're actually making money, a little bit of money as in these low-level jobs. And so this becomes a more democratic approach also to being a doctor or anything else. You don't have to spend a lot of money before you make this decision to continue on in that career. So then you might not try to, maybe you think, maybe I'd like to be a chef. And so you work as a line cook in a restaurant and get an idea of what that life is like and so on, until you find a career path that makes sense to you. So that's the second stage, exploring career paths. And the third stage is certification, credentialization for specialized work, some kinds of careers, including being a doctor, including being an electrician or a plumber, are careers where we would want to know that you really know all the up-to-date procedures, that you know the standard ways of doing things, that you have been tested by experts in this field, and that you can do this safely. I don't want you to learn by trial and error as you're doing surgery on me or as you're rewiring my home. I want to know that you are an expert on this, and I want some people, some sort of evidence of that. And so that would be the third stage. Not all realms of work require this, but some realms of work would. And so that's the stage where actually what we think of as formal training and testing would occur. And it's related very much to the practical issues of performing that kind of a job. So this is my vision for a future of education that makes sense, where it's all very practical, where it's far less expensive for people to pursue than currently is the case. So what would happen in this vision to our existing institutions, our existing schools? So by this vision, our graded elementary and secondary schools would gradually disappear. Maybe they would be converted to self-directed learning centers in some cases, but they would gradually disappear over time by attrition as more and more people are leaving them. Universities would continue on with public support as centers for research and scholarship. Universities provide a very valuable service. The government-supported, grant-supported research and scholarship at universities. They would not enroll students as we currently think of them. I think that the bachelor's degree would go out of style. We wouldn't have this anymore. It's increasingly understood to be a kind of a waste of time. There's so many ways to acquire, to learn whatever you want to know in more efficient ways than going for a bachelor's degree. So, but just as other institutions, just as other workplaces would be taking on apprenticeships and low-level jobs, so would universities. So people who want to pursue a career as a scientist or a scholar of one sort or another would go to a university for low-level jobs. They're working in a laboratory or working alongside a historian or a scholar of some sort as kind of an apprentice. And those who persisted at it would work their way up ultimately to become full-fledged scientists and scholars, just as people in medical school would work their way towards being doctors and so on and so forth. So that's my vision. I think that we have in the United States a system of community colleges which provide kind of hands-on experience, low cost, where you could take a course or two in whatever it is you want. I think that those would continue and maybe even expand. They offer the kind of practical training, classroom training and hands-on experience that is oriented towards careers. They might be the place where that person who's applying to medical school would take her organic chemistry course and microbiology course. These colleges would specialize in the kinds of courses that people would be asking for in order to pursue whatever the career or further education that they are looking for. So I'm going to conclude there. This is my vision for the future of education. As I said at the beginning, I tend to be an optimist. But I do think that we're already on these trends. There's a growing number in the United States. There's a growing number of industries, a growing number of companies that are saying we're no longer focusing just on college graduates, university graduates for our hiring. We're offering apprenticeships. The number of apprenticeships in the last 5 years, the number of official apprenticeships in the United States has doubled. And there are many more unofficial apprenticeships. So I think we're already on this trend. More and more people are taking their kids out of school. There are more and more opportunities for unschooled children. So although optimistic, I think it's not completely unrealistic that we are on this path and that we are eventually going to reach the kind of vision that that I've just described. So thank you very much for your kind attention.
We indeed. I don't know if this is working. This one? Is it working? No, we have a few minutes for questions if anyone has any questions for Peter. Here's a question. Okay, now it's working. Fantastic. Thank you, Peter, so much. Here's the question.
Thank you. I'm from Ukraine, and for a Ukrainian community, Dr. Gray was a superstar of alternative education, and now many families are struggling with education because our possibilities are limited now, and also many families are like forced to not home educate, but have online education. So I would ask to, maybe it's even not that a question. I would like you to support our community, and what should we focus on in our difficult situation?
Wow. First of all, my heartfelt blessings to you. I can't imagine what it's like being in Ukraine now, and I'm certainly no expert on how to adapt to the awful situation that is being perpetrated. So I think that all I can say, I think, is that don't let the lack of schooling, don't let the disruption in formal education add to the discouragement that's occurring. I think it's really important that you trust your children, that the children be supported psychologically, that the children continue to have a childhood, that you promote that childhood, that the children are happy. These are really the most important things. Don't worry too much about about what they're learning. You can learn things anytime. You can learn, there's no critical period for learning anything other than learning your native language without an accent. Other than that, anything can be learned at any time, and it can be learned very quickly in self-directed ways. So I think that a message that I would have is really support your children's emotional and physical comfort. Don't worry about their education.
Any other questions? Yes?
Thank you for this very insightful lesson. I have a question from yesterday. There was no time. So you were talking about artificial age segregated schools. My question is, why do you think that this happened? Why did we put children with the same age together in groups, even though we know for centuries that children just have their own pace and they learn differently and they start to talk at different age and walk and everything? So why the society did that?
Yeah, well, I think that, of course, I've written in my book, Free to Learn, I have a chapter on the history of schooling, and I've also written a blog post on that and on my Psychology Today blog if you want to look at it in more detail. But I think it's important to recognize that the schools we have originated not as educational institutions as we think of education today. They originated as training in obedience. There was no idea that the purpose of school is to develop yourself in some whole rounded way, that the purpose of school is to learn who you are and how you connect to the world and so on. The original purpose of schools, as we know them today, was religious dogma training and teaching children to read so they could read the Bible. Our school system that we have today really originated in Prussia and as early as the 16th, but certainly by the 17th century. Started as part of the Protestant Reformation. And a huge part of the purpose of school was obedience training, training children to obey. So there was never the idea that school, the purpose of school is kind of general enlightenment. The purpose of school was to train children to obey. Well, then as states took over schools, the dogma became more state dogma rather than religious dogma. And that gradually faded out. And over time, we developed the idea that school is for more general educative purposes, but we never changed the structure of school. The structure of school, where you've got a bunch of kids all in the same room and you've got one teacher, or used to be called master, and you're giving out information and the goal is to feed it back. That structure never changed, and we've built this whole edifice around that structure, and that's a structure that doesn't work for real education. It's still good for obedience training. You know, it's still the case that the only way you can pass in school is to do what you're told to do, and almost the only way you can fail is not do what you're told to do. The real message of school is obedience training. So I think, first of all, that's important to understand. Now, then when schools became larger and you began to have cities and schools in cities, and then this was also beginning during the industrial age, and you know, Henry Ford invented the invented the line that you'd construct automobiles by sending it along this line, and you'd add a component all along the line. Schools adopted that model as it was kind of a natural model. So you had this idea that children are a little bit like cars that you're assembling. You're moving them along this conveyor line, and at every stage along the way, some new knowledge is added to them, some new information is added to them. So that's our graded school system. You start off with kindergarten, then first grade, second grade, third grade. And so this idea of age graded fits perfectly with an industrial view of how a child is built, if you will, through our educational system. So I think that's why we have the graded system. It seemed like a very efficient way to do things. Also, if you were to, you know, the way our schools operate, I mean, the biggest problem with how our schools operate is they operate on the assumption that all children are supposed to learn the same things at the same time in the same way. All children in the classroom. Well, that would seem probably, it's absurd on its face no matter what, but it would seem even more absurd if you had in the same classroom 5-year-olds and 17-year-olds. It just wouldn't make sense that they should all be learning the same lessons at the same time. So the age-graded system makes a certain degree of sense from the viewpoint of the history of schooling, and also from this viewpoint that everybody in the classroom is supposed to be learning the same thing at the same time. Self-directed education at a Sudbury school, at a Summerhill type school, at a democratic school of any sort, you can have age mixing because there's no belief that everybody's supposed to be doing the same thing at the same time in the same way. And there's an understanding that people learn by interacting with people who are different from them. And so it's an entirely different framework for thinking about a person's education.
One more question.
Very enlightening. Thank you very much for all that you said. Very interesting. I just want to follow up on the last thing you've said, connected to the trend towards homeschooling and that scale. You know, the industrial factory schools cater for a very high percentage of children. You know, is it feasible, you know, that all of that could disintegrate into, you know, atomized homeschooling or self-directed schooling? It seems like it could, you know, we've already got a dysfunctional society, you know, it seems like the whole thing could disintegrate.
So I think the way I see it, it's not that the school system just suddenly disappears. it disappears as people are leaving it, and they're leaving it for something. They're leaving it, you know, it's not like the school's closed and then the kids are just all out on the street. The people who are leaving the school as an informed decision, and they are they're home educating, they're finding opportunities for their child in libraries, they're finding opportunities in the kinds of learning centers that get imposed. I do think that the state does have a certain role with children, and that's to be sure that children are not being abused, to be sure that children are being provided with an opportunity for educating themselves, opportunities for growth. And exactly how that will work out is an interesting question, and that would probably be a whole different talk, and I would have to give a whole new line of thought about that. But maybe that's what the concern is that you're raising. You know, if we, in some sense, schools are an institution for regulation and control. If everybody has to go there, then we kind of have a way of, the state has a way of looking at children and seeing if they're relatively healthy or not, seeing if there's evidence of their being abused. Part of the purpose of compulsory schooling was to be sure that children are not spending their days working in sweatshops and coal mines and so on and so forth. And so we may need some other procedure to protect children from that kind of abuse. And I think that's something that would have to develop over time. I don't think that enforcing children to spend so much time in school and go through school is a good way of being sure that children are not abused. I think there's other ways we can handle that question.
I have a short addition to. I'm very thankful that you share that it is not about academical level the children approach, but the companies are looking for more skills and competence. And our children, we are from Hungary, where homeschooling is not existing right now, but just like an underground movement with some very few people doing it. And we went, instead of school, because we are homeschooling, to a brain bar event where all the big companies, Google, Apple, were there. And my 14-year-old, who is an introverted, he was so excited after the speech of the Google, I don't know, one of the managers of Google company was there, and he wants to be something with phones and electricity and so, and he just went up to her. I was totally shocked that he stepped out, and he asked how could he join to Google's company, and she said, the leader, that you can just step in on a beginner level anywhere. We have a lot of job offerings for entry level. You don't have to be an expert yet. You can just begin it and come.
Okay, I just have a question, or I'm not quite sure how to to say this, but you're obviously a very staunch supporter of self-directed learning, which I would say I am myself. But I'd like to ask you, do you have any research on, or is there such a thing as failed self-directed learning? Or I guess I meet a lot of, or we have families in our acquaintance who have a big dilemma with, it's an inner turmoil, right? How much freedom do I allow my child, and how much do I demand from the child? Do you know where I'm getting at?
Yeah, I think
is there, in your opinion, such a thing as failed self-directed learning?
Well, I guess you could ask the question, is there such a thing as a failed life? And certainly there is. There's no, there's nothing that works perfectly in life for anybody. But it's one thing, if you are in charge of your own life and things don't work out, it's another thing if somebody forces you in a certain way and things don't work out. I don't want to say that self-directed education is a panacea, that everybody's going to be completely happy, that everybody's going to be successful in life, and so on and so forth. That life is a complex thing. I think that we have that essentially everybody has a better chance of a successful life if they learn how to take charge of their life early on. Really, success requires taking charge of your own life. If you grow up feeling like other people are taking care of you, other people are doing things for you, other people are making your decisions, and so you don't have to do those things, that's a recipe for a failed life in a certain way. So you're not guaranteed a successful life if you grew up with the experience of controlling your own life and your own learning to a large degree. But I think the chance is much greater that that will occur. I do think that there are some people who have very severe brain damage or brain differences from most of us, who do need directed education of a certain sort. So people who are far enough out on the autism spectrum, for example, who don't learn naturally from other people, who don't naturally and easily play and engage with the world in the kinds of ways that most people do, there's excellent evidence that they really need the training from the expertise of people who know how to help people with that kind of a problem. So those would be people for whom complete self-directed education would not work. On the other hand, there are people who are not so far out on that spectrum who, at least in my observations, seem to be doing very well in self-directed education. So I think that there are situations, there are young people who need more direction than others do, and but that the great majority of people who have what are sort of typically functioning nervous systems are best off with lots of self-direction. Of course, parents have an obligation to ensure a certain amount of safety for their children, to be sure that their children are not breaking state laws, and parents are responsible for children in that kind of a sense. And I also think it's parents' responsibility, and I hope increasingly the state's responsibility, to provide every child with the conditions that allow for a healthy self-directed education to occur.
Thank you very much, Peter. This was an insightful morning. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time for questions. It was a pleasure having you.
It was a pleasure being here. Thank you.
So I believe we are ready for the lunch break. This was an insightful morning. So many different speakers, different paths. They all came together in different ways on the same aspects. Here's Sylvia.
Yes, I just have some good information. First of all, are everyone okay, happy, motivated? I don't see many harm, so I will go to my house saying, oh, okay. Now, please raise your hand just as a sign that it is being nice to be here together. Thank you. So, two very great informations. First of all, we will get lunch now, so together. And everyone is invited to the reception at the end of this afternoon at 7 p.m., 7 p.m., I think. It's on the program, okay? Because I'm not the best. 6:30, okay. It's good? Okay. So everyone is invited. It will be this moment for us to make more connections, to do lots of things that we really want to do with each other, okay? Another very important information, please, at 2 p.m., 15 minutes before 1:45 p.m., please stay in the front of the hotel after lunch because we want to have a big picture of us all there, okay? So please. So have a nice lunch. Erica.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's go. That's great.